how do you find the lateral surface area of a cylinder when given the radius and its height? So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now, step one is we're going to locate the radius of the cylinder. So what I would say is whenever I locate it, I always shade in the base. And that line that's there, you know that that is going to be your radius. That's inside of that circular base. So I can say, okay, my radius, I'm going to box it in pink, is 3.9 in this case. Next is you got to locate your height. Well, if you remember when we talked about height, and I'm going to draw it over here, it is the distance between the two bases. So the distance between these two shaded bases is the height. And that distance between it, notice it doesn't have that little bar like I have that shows it's the distance, but that's what that value is. So actually I'm going to do height in black, and I'm going to go ahead and box that. That's my height. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and fill in those values. So for instance, my radius is 3.9 centimeters. So I'm going to put 3.9. My height, the distance between the two bases, is 1.8 centimeters. So I'll put 1.8. Step 3 is we're going to substitute the value of the radius r and the height h into the formula. So let's go ahead and do that. Notice we have a formula here. It says P times h. In other words, that means the perimeter. I want you to write those words out over here. I want you to write P equals perimeter, and h is equal to height. So in order to find the perimeter of a circle, we also call that the circumference, and that formula is 2 pi r, and I've given it to you right here. And then the height is literally just that number, right? That's the distance between these two bases. So let's go ahead and use this formula right here, and we're going to substitute it in. So I have LSA, which means lateral surface area, is equal to 2 times pi, and then times my radius. So I'm going to put my radius in parentheses. It's 3.9. And then I'm going to go ahead and close my parentheses. So you see I have 2 pi r. That's 2 pi r, which means 2 times pi times the radius. And then for my height, I'm going to put it right over here. That was 1.8. And now, if I just put everything that's on the right side of this equal sign in my calculator, I'll have the LSA, or what we call the lateral surface area, which is made up of the perimeter times the height. So let's do that. So we'll go to calculate. I'm going to put my first set of parentheses, and I'm going to do 2, and then I'm going to put my pi, and then I'm going to go and put another set of parentheses where I'm going to input my radius, 3.9. So there's my circumference formula, 2 times pi times r. I'm going to click to get outside of the parentheses and put another set, and then put my height, 1.8. I'll then hit enter, and it gives me 44.108. So let's go ahead and write that answer down. So 44.108. Now I do want to go ahead and approximate that. And remember, when we approximate, I want you to approximate to the tens place. So here's my tens place. So I look at the number after the tens place, and I say, okay, if it's 4 or less, let it rest. 5 or more, raise the floor. Right? So let's go ahead and say it's 4 or less. Right? 0 is less than 4. So we're just going to say it's 44.1. So it's approximately 44.1, and this is in centimeters, so we're going to say centimeters squared, because we're dealing with surface area. That's my LSA, and that's all there is to finding the lateral surface area. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next problem now. Notice in this problem it says, how do I find the lateral surface area of a cylinder when given the diameter d and its height? Okay, well the difference between this one and the other one is, notice this one goes all the way across the base, right? All the way across that circular base. Therefore it is the diameter. So I'm going to go ahead and shade in my bases real quick. Now that I got them shaded in, I want to go ahead and write what the diameter is. So my diameter is 6.5 centimeters. So I'm going to write 6.5. Step 2 says divide the diameter by 2. Well, remember I said that if you divide the diameter by 2, so in other words, if I take 6.5 and I divide that by 2, it's going to give me the radius. So let's go ahead and put that in our calculator, see what it is, and that way we'll know what our radius is. Because notice our formula doesn't ask for the d, it doesn't ask for diameter, it asks for the radius. So anytime we're given the diameter, we have to divide it by 2 to get the radius so that we can actually solve it. Alright, so I'm going to put my fraction bar, and I'm going to go ahead and type in 6.5 in my numerator, and I'm going to put 2 in my denominator, and it's 3.25. We're going to write that down, 3.25, and we'll be using that radius in just a moment. Step 3 says substitute the value of the radius, r, and the height. So we're going to go ahead and substitute that. So from right here, for my perimeter, I have 2 times pi, and then for my r, I'm going to go ahead and put that in parentheses, 3.25. And then I'll close parentheses on the whole thing for the perimeter. And then for my height, on this particular cylinder, my height was 2 centimeters. That was my h. So I'm going to go ahead and put 2 in there. And we'll just put it in a calculator and we'll have our answer. Therefore, if I put my parentheses, I have 2 times pi times 3.25 and times 2. I'll hit enter, and it gives me 40.8407. So we'll write that down, 40.8407. Now remember, this is the LSA that we're getting right here, but I do want to round to the tens place, so I'm going to look at that number after the tens place, right? That 4 and 4 or less, let it rest. So therefore, our final answer for the LSA is going to be approximately 40.8, and this is centimeters, so centimeters squared. Now you know how to find the lateral surface area, which is basically the side of this shape right here. So the total surface area we're going to deal with tomorrow includes both bases. When we talk about lateral surface area, it is just going to be the label of this can. Imagine a tuna can, it has a paper label that runs around it. That's the. Now notice when we're talking about total surface area, we're talking about this curved surface that if we unfolded it, it became the label for our can. We call the lateral surface area. But we're also talking about these 2 circular surfaces, our 2 circular bases. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about total surface area. It's the label and the top of the can and the bottom of the can. Another good image to show this is here. If you notice, they've actually dissected this, right? They pulled the top off, they got the bottom folded down, and you can see that rectangular label part. And since we have 2 bases in our formula, we do 2 times big B, because big B is the area of one base. If we multiply big B by 2, then we have the area of both bases. And you're going to see that in our formula in just a moment. Now for our main topic of the day, it says how do you find the total surface area of a cylinder when given the radius and its height? Well, the first thing that we want to do, step 1, is we want to locate the radius on the cylinder. So I like to shade my bases because I know that the radius or the diameter will always be located on the base of my cylinder. So once I do so, I recognize that this goes halfway across and therefore it is my radius. So I'm going to go ahead and box that. That's my R. Notice step 2 says locate the height. Well, the height is the distance between the 2 shaded areas, or the distance between the 2 bases. And in this case, it's 1.8. That's my height. So let's go ahead and fill those in. The radius is 3.9, and the height is 1.8. Next, it says substitute the value.
No, I'm just watching the thing. I better because there's. Oh, sorry.
So go ahead and fill in your radius, 3.9, and your height, 1.8. Notice step 3 says, substitute the value of the radius for r and the height, h. So let's go ahead and do that. Now you're going to say, well, Mr. H, this formula looks very similar to what we did on lateral surface area. And it is. your lateral surface area just included the P and the H. All we did for total surface area is add the top circle and the bottom circle. In other words, the area of the base, that's why we're multiplying it by 2, because there's two bases. There's a bottom base and there's a top base. And so in math, we just say, well, I'll do the area of one of those circles and multiply it by 2, and then I have the area of both, and everything could be covered if we were trying to figure out how much wrapping paper it would take to cover this cylinder. With that being said, let's go ahead and do this work. So I'm going to start with my P. P, the formula for it is 2 pi r. That's how we find the perimeter of a circle, or what we call the circumference. And so I'm going to write that out. TSA is equal to 2 times pi times my radius, which is 3.9. I'll close parenthesis there. And then I'm going to put my h, which is my height, so times 1.8, plus 2 times my big B, which is the area of the base. And that's going to be pi times my radius, so I'm going to use that same 3.9 again. But then we're going to square it and close parenthesis. So this is P times my h plus 2 times the area of the base, which the way you find the area of a circle is pi r squared. Now if we do that, we will have our TSA, or what we call our total surface area. In other words, we'll know how much surface area is for the total item. In other words, the top, the bottom, and the label, all of it. So let's go ahead and put that in our calculator and see what we come up with. So we just go to calculate, and once we get into calculate, I'm going to put everything that I had on the right side of that equation, which is 2 times pi times my radius, and then that was times my height of 1.8, plus 2 times the area of the base, which is pi my radius squared. Now notice I did put 3.9 in parentheses, but notice I put the little square symbol right outside that parenthesis, because we want to make sure that we do radius squared. I hit enter, and there is my total surface area, 139.675. Let's write that down. So we have 139.675. Now we do want to go ahead and round this to the tens place. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my tens place real quick. That's this number right after the decimal. Notice this is a 7, so that means I need to round 6 up. So I'm going to put my little approximate sign because we're going to approximate it. So the TSA is actually approximately 139.7, and this is centimeters, cm, so I'll put centimeters squared. And that's the total surface area of this first cylinder. Our next problem says, how do you find the total surface area of a cylinder when given the diameter and its height? Okay, well, what we want to do is we first want to go ahead and locate the diameter of the cylinder. That's step 1. So I'm going to go ahead and shade in my bases so I can see my diameter. Now I do know that this is the diameter because I recognize that it goes all the way across instead of just halfway across. So I want to say, alright, well my diameter is going to be 6.5. And then, if you notice, it says divide the diameter by 2. Or as soon as I get that number, I'm going to go ahead and divide it by 2. So I'm going to say 6.5 divided by 2. And that's going to give me my radius. And if I put that in my calculator, divided by 2 gives me 3.25. Now do remember that in this case the 6.5 already has a decimal, so I didn't have to put a decimal in the denominator for it to give me a decimal answer. But if you had a value that you had put in there and there was no decimal, right, if you want to get a decimal answer for sure, you might want to go ahead and make sure you put in a decimal after the denominator. So I'm going to write my radius down. My radius is 3.25. That's what I'm going to use in my formula. So my formula calls for the radius. My height, which is the distance between the two bases, right? The distance between the two shaded areas, it's a 2. So my height is 2. So now we're going to use those numbers in our formula to find the total surface area of this cylinder. So let's go ahead and start with P. I'm going to do P first. So P is going to be 2 pi r. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply 2 times pi times my radius, which is 3.25. And then that's going to be multiplied times my height, which is 2. And then I'm going to add that to 2 times the area of the base, which is basically pi, times the radius, 3.25 squared. So I'm going to put my little square inside the parenthesis. And that'll give me my TSA once I put all that in my calculator. So let's put it in. So I have 2 times pi times 3.25, and that's being multiplied times the height of 2 plus 2 times the area of the base, our big B, and that's going to be pi times r, which is 3.25 again, and then I'm going to square it. Notice that square is inside that final parenthesis, but it's outside the parenthesis of the 3.25. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and it gives me 107.207, and that is going to be my total surface area for this particular cylinder. So let's go ahead and write that down real quick. We have 107.207, which means my total surface area, my TSA, is approximately, because we're going to go ahead and do some rounding here to the tens place. Now notice that is a 0, right? And so that tells me 4 or less, let it rest. So my answer is just going to be 107.2. 107.2, and then this is in centimeters, so it's centimeters squared. That is my answer, and that's how I find the total surface area of a cylinder.